is a series that focuses on issues that are important to all of us. And after the Zoom event tonight, we will send a follow-up email to everybody for whom we have your email address. If we don't have your email address, you can go to ohioDelaDems.org and sign up to get our newsletters and emails from the party. Tonight, we have some great presenters talking about anti-racism. What can we do here in Delaware County? And this is in honor of Black History Month. We take this time to learn about our past and sometimes the present, but the present is what will inform us about what we can do to make a difference in the future. I was delighted to find out that the first celebrations of Black History Month happened at my alma mater, Kent State University. And my brother was a student there at the time and he participated in them. He did not realize that was the first Black History Month celebrations in the United States. So that was a nice piece of history to learn about this year. And I know that getting Black History Month at Kent State was the culmination of a lot of efforts by the Organization of Black United Students at Kent. They made changes in the curriculum there, and they brought about a major in Black Studies, the Center for Pan-African Culture, and a number of other advances that Kent now benefits from. So I want to go ahead and share with you the agenda for tonight. We're doing the welcome and introductions right now. That will be followed by a panel discussion with our three presenters and our moderator, Andre Washington. Then we will entertain questions from the audience. And I imagine most of us have already been on more than one Zoom call, but the protocol is that if you want to speak or ask a question, there's a way that you can raise your hand. And you can also type questions in the chat. We will be monitoring this as we go along, but we may need to save some of the questions for later, but we will try to answer everyone's questions that we have. And then at the end of the presentation and questions, we will talk about where do we go from here. Our moderator is Andre Washington. He is a proud member of the executive committee of the Delaware County Democratic Party, and his latest accolade is to become the vice chair of our state party, the Ohio Democratic Party. We are very thrilled that he is going to be just the #2 guy in the state party. That's going to is going to help our party statewide, and it's good for Delaware County also. He is the state treasurer and a life member of the NAACP. He's the state of Ohio president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, and he's staff representative, Ohio Association of Public School Employees, or OPSE. We have three speakers tonight. Ruchelle Pride, who is the board president at the Second Ward Community Initiative, and she's also the supervisor of the Delaware County Assessment Center for the Delaware County Juvenile Court. Tamika Vinson Reid is the co-chair and also founder of the Delaware African American Heritage Council, and she is marketing and development director for Helpline. And we have Pastor or Reverend Michael Curtis, who pastors the Second Missionary Baptist Church here in Delaware. So these are really excellent presenters that we have tonight, and I will now turn it over to Andre to lead us in the next section.
Thank you, Peg. Before I get started, I want to first thank you, Chairwoman Watkins, and I want to thank the Executive Committee and the members of Delaware County for putting on this very important conversation that we're going to have today. Folks, today, this conversation that we're going to be talking about is anti-racism, racism here in Delaware County, and what can we do in Delaware County? We're going to have a very candid, open conversation. We're going to have a kitchen table conversation, and we're just going to lay all the cards out on the table. This is our county. We are proud to be part of this county, and this is why we're going to have this very important conversation. So as your moderator today, my job is not just to ask the questions, But my job is to keep this program moving smoothly because I'm a firm believer that a program should start and end the same day. Can I get an amen?
Okay.
At this
Amen.
time, sisters and brothers, I am going to allow each panel just to talk briefly, a minute or two, just to tell us a little more about yourself and what you're bringing to this kitchen table conversation. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go with my sister, Tamika. And do you mind if I call you by your first name since this is a kitchen
Sure
table?
can. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you
Okay.
so much for having me, Peg, and the Democratic Party here locally. Thank you so much for hosting this event. It is an important conversation. It's a critical conversation, and it's a timely conversation in the landscape and the climate that's going on right now. So Peg mentioned a couple of things that I do. My day job at Helpline. Again, a founding member and co-chair of the African American Heritage Council here locally. We also have a special initiative called the Ujima Consortium, and that consortium is born out of the council where we look at anti-racist and equitable practices and policies at the city and county level, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that all residents feel like they belong, that they can reach their highest potential and prosper, and that again, we feel safe and secure in our hometown here, right? Our hometown and home county. So we are really focusing on, again, how do we create this beloved community that we speak of, we've heard of, and that's part of why I'm here. You know, again, I've been in Delaware for about 12 years, originally from Columbus, but have a long lineage of activists in my families who started with the NAACP in Columbus. And so that is my passion. I also am passionate about affordable housing, helping homeless families. Part of what I've done here in Delaware is to help found Family Promise. And that was something that really proud of and glad that it's still around. So again, thanks for having me here. I want to keep it brief because I'm ready to jump into this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tamika. And from that resume, you're going to bring a lot to this conversation. We appreciate it. So, Ruchelle, I think I said it right. Did I? Oh, 2 thumbs up. Good. Okay.
Thank you so much, Andre. Thank you to the Delaware County Democratic Party and our wonderful chair, Ms. Peg Watkins, for the pleasure of being a part of this discussion. As Peg mentioned, my day job is the Delaware County Assessment Center Supervisor, which is a program that we established as a community-based diversion effort to help support at-risk youth and their families. There's a lot in our wheelhouse that we do at the Assessment Center to support the community, but the main goal is to not have to criminalize our young people in order to help them. I sit on the as the board president of the Second Ward Community Initiative, Unity Community Center, as we're making a transition. So Unity Community Center is our new branding and the way that we're pushing forward. I've been a part of juvenile justice and advocacy for the past 13 years. I love my children. I love my families, and I'm about whatever is going to be best for them and those around them. I'm newly appointed to the Delaware County Metropolitan Housing Authority Board. I also worked with a community partner, Pastor Nathan from Compassion Church. I got to give him a shout out because he is absolutely amazing. But we came together to form a learning extension center support for the city of Delaware with various community partners to help provide support services and academic engagement for our young people and remove them from isolation of being at home during this quarantine and being able to put them in a safe space to be able to further their academic goals. I'm also a founding partner of the National Association of Assessment Centers. It is a newly developed association as of 2019, and the goal is to focus more on the development of the same thing that I do in my day job and to help support those around the country who are establishing those centers. I am a co-chair for our assessment center work group through the state of Ohio, helping to provide best practices and through a lens of race, equity, and inclusion to other counties throughout the state. A proud member of the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice, focused on anything from social justice to doing what we need to do within our government systems as it relates to minorities and criminal justice. And I also focus on a subcommittee right now with the state of Ohio that also focuses on race, equity, and inclusion and reducing the number of minority youth that come into contact with detention facilities, as well as congregate care facilities, and working to decrease those admissions and the average length of stay that those young people end up attributing. Lastly, I am also happy to be a part of the Delaware County Against Human Trafficking Coalition. Human trafficking is something that I worked with in Franklin County to create a space for these young people and identify victims of human trafficking so we could help them deviate from that life and also go after those who are perpetrators to these young individuals and adults. So thank you for having me. I'm excited, and we got a lot to talk about.
All I can say is, wow, your resume, wow. I couldn't stop grinning. I mean, you just on, and I'm like, oh, my sister, wow. Very, very, very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we are going to turn to Pastor Curtis from the historic Second Baptist Church in Delaware, Ohio. Pastor Curtis. Did we lose Pastor Curtis? Is he still with us?
We somehow lost his audio. So, Pastor Curtis, if you can hear me, can you try logging back in again? For some reason, it's showing you have no audio, so I can't mute or unmute you.
So what we're going to do, we're going to move on and we're going to come back to Pastor Curtis and let him introduce himself in just a second. So we're gonna go with the first question. And ladies, it's just the ladies today, okay, for right now. But today we're having this kitchen table conversation about anti-racism here in Delaware County. And so the question first let me say that systemic racism is when obstacles, seen and unseen, have been created to prevent others from access to or achieving the same goal as their counterparts. So let's just start with the basics, okay? Let's just take everybody from ground zero and let's build a foundation, because I do believe that this is going to be the first of many conversations that we have in Delaware County. But what I'm going to ask of the panelists today is to define racism, systemic racism, and reverse racism to the listening audience. And I'm going to go with my sister Tamika first.
Yeah, great questions. And I'm glad that we're going to ground and center with some definitions, because that's important that we speak with common language. And so I think before we can talk about racism and this concept of, and I'm going to put air quotes around reverse racism because I'm not one to believe in that. And I'll tell you why here in a minute. But dealing with the root word of race. So race is a social construct. It is not based in biology, right? So it was invented by scientists who wanted to create worldviews that some groups were inferior and some groups were superior. So race is not about, individual characteristics or cultural identity. It's more about social categorization, and it's a power dynamic. And it's a marker of a racial group's position of power in society. So I want to make sure that that's clear. Not biology, this is a social construct. And so when you think about racial identities, a lot of times they're socially assigned. So no matter how you self-identify, your very appearance can tell you where your status is in society. So when you think about race, and then you go to racism. So one, racism exists. It's corrosive, it's cancerous, and it costs all of us. And so racism is the ability of one group having the power to carry out systemic discrimination through whether it be institutional policies, practices of a society, and it shapes our cultural beliefs and values in support of those racist policies and practices. So it structures opportunity in a way that it assigns value based upon social interpretation of how one looks, or race, going back to that word, right? And it disadvantages some individuals and communities while unfairly advantaging some communities and individuals. So it basically fails to see all humans as equal, all humans as vital. So racism can be experienced at an internal level, interpersonal level, institutional level, and a structural level, which gets to the word of systemic or structural racism. So I think it's important, again, that we ground in that language, that again, social construct, but these social constructs are about power. It's about the power dynamic in a society. Who has the ability to shape policy, practices, beliefs, values? And so again, a racist is someone who promotes that ability to think about interactions or expresses a racist idea. That is a racist. And so when you think about systems, right, you think about, okay, how do I legitimize and normalize this stuff? And that's what structural racism is. It is the normalization of these historic, cultural, institutional, and interpersonal advantages that one group has over another. So it produces truly chronic and cumulative adverse outcomes for people of color at the end of the day. So it's steeped in, and diffused in white domination, and we see it each and every day. It's pervasive. So again, those are just some very basic concepts around race, racism, and structural racism. And I think that will help set us up for really good conversation this evening.
Thank you very much, Tamika. And I'm glad you mentioned the part about reverse racism, because we purposely put that question in there just so that everybody can hear your comments about it. So that was set up because what people need to hear, they need to hear this.
Yeah.
So thank you. I see, I'm going to pause now, and Pastor Curtis from the historic Second Baptist Church has joined us. And if you can give us an introduction of yourself, Pastor Curtis, we would appreciate that. And then I will repeat the question, and then you can hop right in with the answers.
Okay. Well, first, I'm the pastor of Second Baptist Church. I've been a pastor now for 6 years there. I started coming there back in the late 60s, early 70s when Upper Bound. My experience with Delaware was you stay in your place and then don't come off campus. From there, I never, ever thought that I would ever be back in Delaware, but here I am. Okay. Since arriving in Delaware, I think the first thing I had to do was I had to cross some divides. The first thing I had to learn is that there's no longer railroad tracks in Delaware. My members are old school, they're real old. They didn't cross the railroad tracks that used to be there, they didn't cross. So first of all, I had to get my mindset out of, okay, we need to break bounds that are there, boundaries that are invisible. The invisible boundaries was invisible racism is invisible. Systemic, when we start talking about something that is systemic is something that is set up, supposedly is hidden, but it's a hidden virus or a hidden a disease that is implanted in people that really some of us don't know that it's really there. So the first thing I had to do was I had to break that. So what I felt was education was the first thing that had to occur. And the one thing was boundaries. Okay, boundaries was, okay, the police is thinking one way, and the government is thinking one way. So I had to cross that, and I had to do it, first of all, myself, and then I had to cross black and white boundaries. When my first meeting with the judicial system, I met with Chief. I sat down, but I met with some of his officers, and one of them sided with something that we both viewed. There was a big black man walking down the middle of the street. He had a towel over his shoulder, and there was a little police officer. She was small. Her boyfriend was in the helicopter, and the boyfriend said that he felt that she was harassed by this big black guy walking down the middle of the street. This led to a big movement. This led to a whole lot of misunderstandings because the police officer that I was sitting with and I was carrying this conversation with said he felt the same way the guy did in the helicopter. And then I looked at him and said, you mean to tell me that you're in a helicopter and you're intimidated by a man on the street and you're in a helicopter? That does not make sense. Okay, so why am I living in fear? Fear was the next thing that we had to approach. So and that's another part of education. So we had to get past the fear factor. So we had to deal with chief, we had to deal with the police, we had to deal with my members and crossing these boundaries. Then also with the sheriff's department, it was a grind. So I couldn't get a lot of the members in the community to go with me because we're plowing ground that people don't want to plow because they don't want to be out front. I don't live in Delaware, but my church is in Delaware. And my job is to help my members. They live in Delaware. My job is to protect them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take care of them. So I let everybody know I don't have any financial or anything. I don't have a political aspirations in Delaware. All I want is what's right. So we had to deal with that. We had to deal with the churches there because my members didn't cross over boundaries. They didn't go downtown. They didn't shop downtown. They didn't go anywhere in Delaware. So we had to work with that. We had to work with fellowship. And the biggest thing that I thought was, well, police officers go to church. So let's go with that. Let's deal with the preacher part. So the next thing we know, we started having services, joint services that didn't happen before ever. But then I come to find out I had to deal with prejudice inside of that because there was a woman thing. They didn't believe in women preachers, women speakers. So I had to get past the evangelical part of that part. And then it was the same-sex marriage stuff that we had to deal with. And I said, man, look, let's just get past all this stuff. If you're going to come together, if we're going to do this, then there's a common denominator. There's a ground. Let's find this common denominator. And then being out there, you got to understand when you're the person that's out front, you out front for real. And fingers are pointed and everybody's pretty much on you. You get criticized. People won't back you on a lot of things. And that's what we found that we had to do, but it's still a grind. And now here we are, here you are. And I have to commend you. I'm proud of you. I'm glad you got the position that you got, brother. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I'm happy to be a part of this program, and whatever we can do and whatever I can do, I'm willing to help. But my background, educated overseas. I've been around the world, working on a double master's right now. I have a lot of other things that we've done in Delaware, programs we've ran in Delaware, things that we've done there, a lot of the parks that we've gotten done. So we've done a lot there. It's just that we got a lot more work to do.
Thank you, Pastor Curtis. And I have to do a quick shout out. If you ever want to hear some good preaching, if you ever want to hear some good teaching, and if you want to hear some good singing, you go over to Second Baptist Church. And I advise you to go on a day that they're cooking, because then you go downstairs in the fellowship hall. He will feed your mind, your heart, and your belly all at the same time. Thank you again, Pastor Curtis.
I thank you.
Yes. Now we're going to go to my sister, Ruchelle.
Yes.
And Ruchelle, do I need to repeat the question, or you got it, my sister?
I got it.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you to my fellow panelists, because they narrowed in on a lot of things that I want to continue to highlight, and helping us understand how racism operates on both a individual and institutional level. So as we talked about the systematic racism and how those are intentional operational barriers that are established to keep certain racial groups out of the wheelhouse. I mean, to boil it down, it's created to establish this sense of unacceptance to those who are trying to climb that ladder to what we consider to be success for them and success for their families. Racism watered down on an individual level is simply the intolerance for one's race, or a person's race, ethnicity, culture that's outside of their own. So if we're looking at the racism just as the most watered down kitchen table conversation we can have, it's intolerance. It's just absolute, we're not going to anything that does not promote the equality of all races on all levels. One thing that I want to make clear as we talk about terms and understanding kind of where we are and what we need to understand is those implicit biases. Understanding that how we first have to show up and be a reflection in the mirror to ourselves as to what biases we have, because these type of conversations are great to have, but if we can't first recognize where we stand in relation to our own biases, our own thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes that promote the way we think, believe, and feel about other people in general, we're not going to go anywhere fast. So we first have to be able to look at ourselves honestly and truthfully and say, what implicit biases do I have about Black people? What implicit biases do I have about the Hispanic population? What is it that I do that I don't even realize I do when these individuals are in my space? If they come into a construct of a business or a boardroom, how do I interact with them? How do I engage with them different from someone who looks like me? These are all things that we have to be mindful of. We also have to be clear that racism, prejudice, and bigotry are not interchangeable. Those are three different definitions. Those are three different ways of saying three different things. Now, under the construct of what we know to be intolerable and not acceptable, yes, they all fit under that mode. But those three things is homework that I give to the audience to understand that there's a difference between those three things. And we need to, first, recognize what our biases are, implicit and explicit, okay? Because sometimes we have folks who just explicitly do things that we know are violations of the human rights, civil rights of those who we just simply are intolerable against. So we just have to be clear about how we look at things and first understand the terminology of what we identify ourselves to be. A lot of racist views are structured around the idea that there's a sense of entitlement or privilege for that particular race that's exercising that racism. There's a sense of entitlement that simply just sits there, and it's a false sense of security, but it's there as their security blanket to say, you know what, I'm protected. So I don't have to say anything about the injustices because it doesn't affect me. I can sit in my entitlement. I can rest in my entitlement. I can rest in understanding that because I don't have to speak up against this, I don't have to be made to feel uncomfortable. I'm just not going to. So it's just almost like we're avoiding the bigger issue. And I always say that if you can ignore the elephant in the room, you are the elephant in the room. You cannot ignore what is happening on a local and large global level. It's just too apparent. So we have to be clear about those things. And as far as reverse racism, I agree with my sister Tamika. I don't believe that's a thing. And be honest with you, I feel like reverse racism is simply a clapback, or should I say a response to those who are unaffected. It doesn't affect you. So it's easy to say, well, there's no way. Racism is simply the fact that there's a Black History Month. That's reverse racism. How can you say equality, but then you have a whole month? Well, when there's 11 other months that are dedicated to 11 other cultures and people, and I think that at the least we could get is the 28 days. So we just have to be clear about what we're saying and be intentional and explicit about how we say it, because that there lies the underbelly and how we can build the foundation to get to a better place.
I gotta chime in. Chime in because
Michelle,
you hit it on the head. You know, with reverse racism, many times you hear that when either people of color call out racism or discrimination, or you know, other people feel like there's not space created for themselves. So, you know, people were in an uproar about BET. And like you said, why is there Black History Month? And my thing is, let's take a look at our current climate. 4 Black CEOs in the Fortune 500. So that means there's 496 who are white. Of the 117th Congress, there are 73 members of the House who are white. 89% of the Senate is white. According to the Federal Reserve, we've got white households who account for 84% of the total wealth in the US. Black households account for 4% of the total household wealth. So I think it's safe to say, when you think about reverse racism, I think our brothers and sisters are all right outside of, you know, the BIPOC population. I think our white brothers and sisters are going to be okay, right? But I think we have to be very careful, because when you talk about reverse racism, it's denying that privilege exists, right? Privilege is something that's unearned. Privilege is something that you don't have to think about, you don't have to experience, because it's simply who you are. And so when you think that there's not space for you, think about what that says. That basically says that it speaks to the pervasiveness of white privilege. You don't have to think about these things, and why shouldn't you be included in everything, right? You should be able to take up any space. And so that's very dangerous. And I say that too, because when you think about, I've heard that White History Month piece a lot, especially during this time of the year. But when you think about it, most Black kids in America won't learn that they'll learn that they're descendants of slaves before they learn that they're descendants of African civilizations, right? They won't learn about in 1903, Maggie Lena Walker was the first, African-American woman to serve as a bank president. They won't learn about 1952 Charlotte Bass, who was the first African-American woman to be on a major party ticket, right? The Progressive Party. They won't learn about Jane Bolin, who was the first African-American judge. They won't learn about any of this, right? Unless it's intentional, unless you have teachers who intentionally teach through a centered lens of pro-Blackness instead of anti-Blackness. So again, that reverse racism argument is a fallacy.
It is.
Oh my God, I'm getting goosebumps. I'm just loving this. You ladies and Pastor Curtis, y'all just took me to church tonight. Pastor Curtis, if there's an opening for assistant pastor, I see two of them sitting right here.
I think that we need to really, since we're talking about racism, and since we're on this venue, then I think first of all, looking at it from a religious aspect, we have to look back throughout history, even before they even got over to Africa or when they showed up on the scene. Racism existed from the beginning. But there was an issue that even the Jews had, an issue which was us, when we had a problem with Jesus and he had to escape and go to a place called Egypt. And then when we learned who was in control of Egypt and how he fit in there, but who he ran from, then here's my issue is that even Jesus had to deal with racism. Every time that he would go from one end of the Jordan to the other one, there's a group of people that he had to pass on the eastern side of the Jordan. And every time he passed over, what the Jews didn't want to be reminded of was the stuff they did to these particular set of people. And when we look at America, all they want to do a lot of times is that we want to erase some things from society, and the systematic racism, which is a poison that has been imputed in us as a people against one another. But what has happened was we don't want to be reminded of what we've done. But the sad part is that they can't do to us what happened to the Indians. There's not a reservation big enough for us. You understand? We are too involved. We're everywhere. So then to denigrate us, so laws are made. There are penitentiaries made for the brothers to go to, that we make up 80-90% of the institutions. Sad thing is, even in sports, we can entertain them, but we can't be their leader. Okay. And when the system is set up, it is set up so that we think that we're getting ahead when we're not. And the thing is that sometimes we're our own worst enemies because we don't get in it and say, you know what, we can make a difference, but we don't take our opportunity to do so. But we could say, well, is it better? Is it worse? Well, I can say because I was born in the 50s. Okay, so now I watched what happened from the 60s on. I saw things happen up until this period of time. And is it frustrating? Yeah. Okay, we're still getting killed by police officers. 65, 66, 67, you understand? So when we say racism, that system is set up to poison not only the world, but poison us against our own selves. And then it poisons us against each other. And the sad part is that sometimes we allow it to happen because it's easier to accept what's going on around us instead of us picking up and doing some things for ourselves. But you know, the law is still out there. We still got to confront the elephant in the room, as the sisters were saying, and we still got to stand up and fight for some of the rights that we have, that we need to have. Just like what happened on the 6th. And now they want to pretend that it didn't happen. It happened. So now that you're going out of office, you want to act like we're just going to brush that over. You can't brush that over like you can't brush us over. Okay? So there's somewhere along the line, we're going to have to say, okay, this is it. This is where we're going to draw the line. We're going to fight from here, and this is where we're going to go. But we need to educate everybody on both ends. Not only are we striking out at the ones that are giving us the problem and giving us the blues, but also we got to educate ourselves. We can't just keep going after one individual and we don't change.
Thank you very much, Pastor Curtis. We appreciate that. I want to remind everybody that we are streaming live on Facebook. If you have a question, please put the question into the chat. We'll get to the questions later. If you're live on Facebook, feel free to send questions on Facebook. Now, I'm going to ask the panelists to give us a brief description of what is anti-racism. What is anti-racism? And I'm going to go to you first, Pastor Curtis.
We use religion as saying that we're anti-racist, but then on Sunday morning, that's the most racist day of the week. Anti-racism supposedly is an act of individuals that say, okay, I don't see color. I don't see a difference. You know, Black Lives Matter, that was supposed to be anti-racism, but some people use it for their advantage when they saw an opportunity to just jump in and do something that caused conflict. I felt anti-racism to me is a person that is willing to make the sacrifices that need to be made to do something that's right. Now, there are some people out there that are willing to cross the boundaries. There are some people out there that's willing to accept whatever punishment that they're going. They had abolitionists during the time of slavery. And there are some people out there that might be good, that are good, that do want to affect the change. But, you know, it's hard to recognize them at times. I had the opportunity to meet a couple in Delaware that I feel one lost his church. A couple of them got into a lot of trouble. Okay. And you can call them in on it. They don't mind standing next to you. But those people are few and far and in between. Because when it comes down to it, can I give you something? I'm dealing with a lot now in counseling at my church on mixed marriages where the children are having problems identifying as to who they are. And I have to counsel those children being bullied because they don't fit in as being Black or they don't fit in as being white, but nobody educated them, okay? So when we talk about anti-racism, we got a whole lot of stuff that's standing in front of us now that we got to deal with. But how do we deal with it? Okay, so anti-racism is, I don't see color, I see opportunity.
Thank you, Pastor Curtis. I just want to ask you, just if you can just briefly, because that's a situation that I dealt with when I used to live in Michigan, and sometimes kids they may be living with their mother that's Caucasian, but they look like their African American father, and they're stuck between a rock and a hard place because they don't know who to identify with. So that's something that that we probably need to have further dialogue on. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Pastor Curtis. Ruchelle, anti-racism. Can you give us your? Thank you.
I can. Anti-racism to me, in the simplest forms, is zero tolerance. we have to understand that it's zero tolerance for there to be this idea that there's a supremacy of one race over another. And it promotes equality, that it's not about what it is that I can do because of who I am, the color of my skin, the privilege that I have, but what you're just as capable as doing. And as Pastor Kersey just stated, it's about the opportunity. You see me as who I am. And I think that that's the problem, is that we look at diversity as something to be afraid of. So when we talk about diversifying areas of counties and cities similar to Delaware, we look at that as, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Instead of looking at diversity as opportunity. Diversity is
Right.
beauty. Diversity is something that is going to create opportunities, resources, relationships that are, to me, unimaginable. It literally allows you to reimagine all of the beautiful parts of who we are and stop focusing on what I consider the prejudice of who we are, which is you don't even want to know who we are. You simply just have made up a decision based on thoughts and ideas but not from your own experience, or the bigotry of being stubborn and just saying, I absolutely refuse to even accept anybody else other than myself. Or again, going back to the racism and systematic racism that exists. It's, I was on one of my, we had a workshop, a conference, the National Association of Black and Criminal Justice. And a few of our presenters, one being Dr. Chanel Jones, who's doing great work in the Columbus, Ohio area. She actually came up with something that I thought was phenomenal to say. But we look at racism as how it impacts us and how great it would be to be anti-racist. But one of the things she mentioned was, well, it would be great for you too, white people, if racism didn't exist. It would be great for you as well. Like, this isn't just something that benefits us. As a society, if racism went away and we were able to eradicate or minimize the impact of that racism, it actually is better for everybody. You're not wondering based on a person's how they look, how they show up in the world, whether you walk by them and they're going to steal your purse, or whether you're afraid that if it's too many Black people in your neighborhood, you're going to get robbed or shot. It eliminates these fables that we tell ourselves because of what the media and propaganda promotes, instead of what's really happening in the world around us. I'm not taking away that we know that murder happens. We know that crime happens. We know that all different facets of illegal acts happen. But to say that basically this is something that's precipitated more by one race or versus the other is inaccurate. And actually it's ignorant to suggest without being willing to do the work. So anti-racism on a absolute grand scale is flat out zero tolerance for this idea that one is better than the other, and it promotes equality, that we are all better together versus being apart.
Thank you. Tamika, give us your definition of anti-racism.
I'm going to make it real simple. It is basically acknowledging that, racist structures and beliefs are pervasive and they exist, and it's being willing to do the work to tear down those beliefs and those structures. That is being an anti-racist, really, at the bottom line. And it's really interesting that, Ruchelle, you made a point about, it costs all of us, or corporate America figured out many years ago that it would be better for them to understand how to address racism, because they knew that in order to get market share, I need to understand the mindset of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, right? So I'm going to create diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts because I need to have those folks at the table helping me get insights about these communities, because I want market share and I want dollars, right? So even though they were being anti-racist in their approach, they were thinking from a capitalist mindshare standpoint. They knew that they could benefit, right, from taking an approach of, at least we need to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive in the way that we approach market share, right? So anti-racism, going back to that, it is basically tearing down the pervasiveness of the structures and beliefs of racists, point blank, period. And I think we have to understand too, Ruchelle, you said something about that violence piece. And I got to say something about this. I know many of our audience members have heard about this cliche I'm going to call this Black on Black crime. Okay, so let's get into that real quick. Violence is not exclusive to Black people. White people kill white people at the same rate that Black people kill Black people. The root issue is unequal distribution of power and resources, right?
Yes.
So not having what you need to live well, that is the root of violence.
Mm-hmm.
So Black dysfunction does not lead to violence. It's proximity, who you are around. And so if the priority was about well-being of people as opposed to well-being of corporate interests and capitalism, it would look different. So I want this audience to take away that term, Black on Black crime does not exist. Don't let anyone tell you that it does, because again, the incidents and the rates are very much similar. It is not a function of Black dysfunction. And I have to unpack that. And that is part of being anti-racist. It is to tear down those beliefs that our culture has perpetuated and we have bought into. And so that is a very real example of what it means to be anti-racist. When you hear things like that, take the opportunity to dig into it and deconstruct it, because that is our responsibility. It may not be your experience, but it is your responsibility.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Panel, now that we have your perspective on systemic racism, anti-racism, tell us now, what challenges do African Americans or people of color, what do they face in Delaware County? I'm going to go to you first, Ruchelle.
Well, I will go back to some stats that we have as it relates to as of recent as 2018 in Delaware and kind of where we sit. Right now in Delaware, as we talk about challenges, we have to look at the foundation of it, the numbers of it, so we know where we at, so we know where we need to go. And when I look at it, it's 85.7% of Delaware County is white. We have 5.88 represented Asian, and only 3.27 are Black. Okay, when you look at it from and overall, we see where and how easy it is for the systematic racism and the other things that contribute to basically that imbalance of power is relative right there in those numbers. It's relative in the opportunities, it's relative in how we show up, because we understand that it is more of our Caucasian brothers and sisters than it is of anybody else. So those are challenges that in a nutshell, it creates a place for those who are of a BIPOC. They feel this inferiority, like they don't belong. And so then they're fearful to step up and participate in things that are going to create the change and the diversity that the county needs to see. One of the things too is that in 2018, those numbers really illustrate that there are about 14.6 times more Caucasian than it is any other race in the county. Again, it goes to a space where individuals feel challenged just by what they see, but what they see is it's not a fable. It's reality and understanding that, okay, we're at a disadvantage. And when people feel at a disadvantage, when they are at a disadvantage, when there are stark differences in socioeconomic gaps that are created, it creates a place for individuals to feel like there's no way that I can survive this. There's no way that I can actually get past any of this. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, I am going to be stigmatized because I am underrepresented. And then when you have some of the things that happen, such as the Fair Housing Act, and some of the housing, the redlining that happens in Delaware County, and the fact that there are inflation of fees that the city imposes, there are things that are created to where systematic keeps out BIPOC populations. So the systematic racism, one thing it will tell you is that those things that present challenges that we can easily identify, oh no, that's just how it is. That's just that, we did this number and we divided it by this number and this is a number we came up with. Not at all. The reality of it is that when we're talking about some of the same things that were happening back in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was passed, okay, a week after MLK passed, those same struggles before that act, there were rallies that happening in the city of Chicago because of the lack of fair housing and the discard and the in my opinion, the disapproval of African Americans going into middle class neighborhoods. So there were rallies, there were riots, there were protests because of this. Then the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968. Here we are now, fast forward several decades, and we're in no better situation than we were back in 1968 when you look at how fair housing is really being dealt with, okay, on a local level. There's redlining here. it's challenges to get minorities into the county and diversify the area. The inflation creates a pocket where people can't afford to be here. Majority of individuals of color cannot afford to be here because we associate money with status, ability, opportunity. If they don't have the money, then they're going to come here and do terrible things. I mean, there's so many just untruths about how that all works. So I think that to me is one of the bigger challenges that we have to address collectively.
Thank you. Ms. Tamika, same question.
Big question. That's a big question. You know, one of I call her my co-conspirator, Whitney Gurman. She's a member of the council. She did a fabulous presentation about the design of inequity in Delaware. And what we learned is that in areas where there's a higher concentration of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, there's a six years less life expectancy. Mm-hmm. She looked at our neighborhoods and the way that they're situated and, you know, who has access to grocery stores or walkable paths or lighted paths, or is there toxic elements in the neighborhood? And so when you think about, going back to Ruchelle's point, this design of inequity, right? It's happening right in our own backyard, so to speak. So when you think about whether it be the Second Ward area and, you know, how many fast food restaurants can you have in one area? You know, you think about, okay, where's the nearest supermarket? It's 2.5 miles away. So there's so many things that, you know, that's just one thing. That's one element of what's going on here in Delaware, right? But I think also representation is a huge issue, right? And, you know, my thing is, if you are not in the room, you're definitely, you're on the menu, you're being talked about. So, you know, my thing is, how do we, you know, representation, and not just for the lack of representation, right? Because you want people to represent you who you align with their policies, you align with the beliefs and values, right? So representation is huge. And whether that be on school boards, city council, commissions, being appointed to different groups, whatnot. So all of that matters. Representation is a huge, I think, opportunity and gap in this particular community. You know, how is it that we can make sure that our voices and our faces are heard, and there's the things that come out of our faces, right, are implemented? Because diversity for the sake of diversity ain't it, right? So we need to make sure that when we're there, we are being heard and we are being included in the conversation. So I think there's a whole host of issues. I want to, you know, toss it over to Pastor Curtis, because I know he's probably got a lot more to say as well. So I don't want to take up all the air in the room, so I'm going to pass it over.
Thank you very much. Pastor Curtis, you have a very historic church here in Delaware County. What challenges does your members face here in Delaware County?
Fellowship. One of the things I'm facing now, I've had to do a lot of deaths, funerals in the past 5-6 months. I understand everything that we're saying. One of the things that really disappointed me most of all is that we don't stand up to be counted, first of all. We don't stand up to be recognized. Until I came to that church, they didn't even vote. They didn't vote. You understand? So they weren't being counted. So then they're not included in the 3% or the 5% that's being counted on top of that. So, but we as a people, we don't stand up to be counted. Then when we're counted as half or whatever we're counted as. I won't get into all of that because I know how that's being done. But also, now that I've done so many funerals, and I mean I've done a lot. I'm sick of doing funerals. Okay, let's just put it that way. But at these funerals, I see mixed marriages with kids that are quadrones, mulattoes, and all this, who are Black, don't know they're Black because you got to be 20% or whatever, or they got white grandparents, but they're Black children, but they're not counted in because they don't identify with a certain group. Then the daddy goes off and goes to jail. I got to deal with, can you help him get out of jail? Can you talk to so-and-so and so on? so-and-so's dead, but it's a white grandparent with a black child that doesn't know how to handle the black child because the black child is mixed. You understand? So now they're not considered as, these are the numbers that we're dealing with now. Okay, so now these are the attitudes I got to deal with now. And out of my church, those churches that you see, those minority black churches there in Delaware, all of them came out of Second Baptist. Every last one of them, all of them. And then they split off. Then there was divorces, there were separations, big families, huge families that didn't get along with one another. Then married into a different group of people. Now I got to deal with who's related to what, who, where. They living on another side of town. And then the last funeral I did, I'm looking at people I haven't seen before. I'm like, well, where you from? Well, we live in Delaware. Well, where you been? I've never seen you before. Oh, well, we live around here. Or we live on the north side now. Or we live off of Hawk Road now. Or we live over here now. So now we're dealing with that. But now they disassociate themselves with the struggle that's going on in the community that they left. Okay, so now we got to deal, now we're dealing with people that said, look, I don't want to be a part of that. And they want to grow up and get out and leave. But I'm asking, what is it that you need to do to stay? What do you have to offer to keep them there? Okay, nothing, because no one wants to do anything at times to build it up. And then most of the people, I'm from Columbus. As a matter of fact, all of us are from a different city.
Mm-hmm.
Are you feeling me? But we come in looking like, hey, this is a gold mine. We are in the richest county in the state. There's money there. Why are we running away from it? But we run away. We don't get it. We don't want it. And then the last thing that I got to do that we deal with a lot. Okay, that Trump stuff and that all that movement that happened. Oh, I fought a lot. I made sure on where everybody was, this marching stuff, all this mess that was going on. I asked a lot of questions, but I was worried about that 4 years ago, before it even occurred. But I'm dealing a lot with mixed. But if you 1/8 black, you black, but you don't consider yourself that. So you don't count yourself as that if you can pass for something else so that you can fit in, not knowing that, you know what, I am black, but I don't fit in. Why? It's because of where they are. And that's sad. But now I got grandparents that don't know what to do.
Thank you, Pastor Curtis. You hit the nail on the head. I want to remind everybody that we are live on Facebook. And if you have a question, please put it in the chat or message us on Facebook, and we will try to get to your questions tonight. So now my next question, I'm going to start with you, Ms. Tamika. The next question is, what can allies do to support equitable policies and practices here in Delaware County, and who are those allies?
Well, by now you all should know that I have to ground it in a definition. But my essential question is, what are you willing to risk, and are you willing to take up the struggle as your own? Because that is the undertone of an ally. An ally is anyone in the dominant group or majority group that's willing to work towards the end of the oppression for those who are in the marginalized or underinvested or oppressed group. So, right, that's my functional definition of an ally. It's interesting because allies can be unlikely, right? So when I think of an ally, I'm thinking of someone, I'm able-bodied. I should be willing to stand up for those who are disabled. Black Lives Matter folks were standing up for those Native Americans that when their land was being railroaded, right, by their ancestral lands were being attacked, right? Allies are white people who are willing to lead the charge to end racism. Allies are men leading the charge for pay equity for women, right? Valuing women's work. So those are people that I consider allies. Again, I always say it may not be your experience, but it is your responsibility. So when you think of any major movement, allies have been people such as, when you think about the NAACP, the founding of the NAACP in 1909, it was co-founded by white progressives, right? When you think about the Black Panthers, they partnered with the Puerto Rican Patriots, and they partnered with the what was it, the Young Lords, right? It was a white group. They all formed this rainbow coalition, right? Because they all knew that if they could cross-class organize and across race, and if they could all attack supremacy and capitalism, they knew that together they could form a collective movement. So sometimes your allies are unlikely, but again, if you have a common purpose and a common mission to move forward, you can. So, and I also think about this, sorry, I get excited about history, right? So when you think about the Voting Rights Act of 1965, do you all know there were only 6 African-American members in the House and 0 in the Senate, and it passed? Somebody had to have an ally to get that to pass. So think about that from a historical standpoint. So who are our allies? Allies are people, again, who are invested in the struggle. I think one of the things that there's a misconception that, you know, Black folks need to be saved or we need help. No, we need commitment. Are you willing to take this struggle up as your own? What are you willing to risk? Are you willing to risk position? Are you willing to use your privilege in the help of or the aid of someone else, right? So again, allies to me are people who put it on the line. And I think there's a continuum in the ally movement, right? You can be an ally and then you can be a co-conspirator. That co-conspirators, those are people who you know are down like 4 flat tires, as I like to say, right? Those are people who you can call on to stand up for you, and no matter what, they will stand on what is right because it is right. So I think when you think about allies, you have to figure out in your own, you know, in your own self, okay, can I take this struggle up? Am I willing to transfer my privilege to benefit someone else? Am I willing to amplify someone else's voice instead of my own? Can I decenter myself and lift up other voices that aren't traditionally lifted up? Can you stand up when you're scared? Are you afraid to make a mistake? Be corrected and be okay with that. So ally is the verb, do the work. That's an ally. Do we have allies in the city? Absolutely. Nothing can get done without allies, whether they be likely or unlikely. So again, the question is, what are you willing to risk? And will you take this struggle up as your own?
Thank you, Ms. Tamika, and thanks for mentioning the NAACP, as I say, the biggest, baddest, boldest, oldest civil rights organization in the world. I'm going to turn to Pastor Curtis. I want to remind everybody that we are live on Facebook and we are an hour and 7 minutes into the program. So I just want to remind everybody that we are going to start and end the same day. Pastor Curtis?
I agree with Tamika. She covered a lot with that one. An ally is like a friend, and a definition of a friend is a person that's on the same side of a struggle. You don't friends find you. You don't find friends. They find you. They come to you. They attach themselves to you, and then there's just some things that happen when you get an ally. What are you willing to lose? But then look at what are you willing to gain. I've had a couple in Delaware that stood beside me that took a great big loss standing there, and I knew they would. But I was very open and letting them know that, okay, man, you're going to take a hit. But I'm willing to stand with them when they go through things that they go through as well. We all need a friend, and everybody needs an ally. I've never seen anyone travel through life that could not make it through any adversity and they went through by themselves. It cannot occur. Allies, also, we need allies, but we also need allies that look like us as well. If we could just pull ourselves together and put our own interests together instead of being combative with one another, and we become friends with each other, because sometimes our biggest enemies are us. Okay, and that's the one thing that I have a problem with. if we could just become together. And she used the Black Panthers. So since she used the Black Panthers, I had an issue with a city official when we were doing the Juneteenth. And I had a black fist, and they thought that was the Black Panther thing. And I had to stand my ground. We had to sit down and I had to educate them because they believed what they had heard about the Panthers, and I had to educate them on the Panthers. You know, and what a lot of people don't know is when Tamika mentioned, you know, when you mentioned the Rainbow Coalition, that's exactly what happened. But then right around the corner, right behind that, is what the FBI did to them too. And then they considered public enemy number one, but they started, you know, the breakfast, after school education program. They did a lot of stuff in the community. They kept the gangs separate. They kept the drugs out of the community. They did a lot of stuff, but all we saw was the bad stuff. And they needed partners. But then again, you know, Martin's biggest enemies were people that look like Martin, to be honest. That's why the letter in the Birmingham jail was as powerful as it was. If you read it, you'll know why. And he said what he said. But I'm in agreement. We all need allies, but it's just who's on your side and what are they willing to lose?
Thank you, Pastor Curtis. Ruchelle?
Pastor Curtis, Tamika, excellent job in summing that up. I mean, the only thing that I could add to that is that, you know, I stand firm in what our brother Malcolm X talked about when he said, I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it's for or against. That to me is the epitome of allyship and being willing to stand in a place and stand flat-footed and be clear about who you're with, what you're for, and why. And I think that it goes back to understanding that it's not about, at the end of the day, although we're trying to, as Tamika said, deconstruct these views and the ways in which we operate based on those views, it's understanding how important it is to stand in unison, because in unison and in unity and in community is the only way that we are going to be able to push forward collectively in the spirit of allyship, along with community activism, you know, understanding and stepping outside of yourself, moving yourself out of the way. As my grandmother used to say, get out of your own way, and began to really look at, okay, how do we go about doing these things? How do I get involved? And in what way can I be that epitome of allyship? So I think that it's just really, at the end of the day, we understand that it takes all of us. We have to understand and be transparent in that it takes all of us to achieve what we are trying to reach. And I think that as long as people are willing to stay there and remain there, we can do that.
Thank you very much. So panel, I'm going to ask another question, and I'm going to ask you if you can give us a 1.5 minute answer, no more than 2 minutes, because we want to be able to get to some questions from the audience. So Pastor Curtis mentioned earlier that all of us on this panel, including me, we're not from Delaware County. I'm from Michigan by way of Toledo, and now I'm here in Delaware. Panel, can you tell us, and I'm going to go to you, Pastor Curtis, first. Where have you lived, and how does the area that you either live in now or you live compare to Delaware County when it comes to race relations? Pastor Curtis? And you know, folks, it's hard to tell a pastor that you have a time limit.
Yeah. Where I live, I grew up in a predominant area. We were restricted in the area that I lived in where I grew up. Okay, so, and then I went to a Catholic school. I played basketball, so I got an opportunity to see both sides of the field. And then going into the military allowed me to see life differently. And then traveling overseas, I got to experience different people, different cultures, which changed my perception of life. Okay, so when it changed my perception of life, then it changed the way I looked at people. It changed the way I looked at opportunity. And then I started to accept the world a little bit differently than what I did when I first started out. And I think that's what we have to do now, is open our minds.
Thank you. Ruchelle?
I was born and raised in Mansfield, Ohio. For you guys who may not know where that is, but it's like that midway point between Cleveland, Ohio and Columbus, Ohio. Mansfield was known for a steel mill and prisons. So you either worked at the steel mill or you were at the prison yard working. And historically, there was a period of time that Mansfield was very booming in the industry as far as manufacturing and things like that. So I love my little town, but there are many areas as far as how it compares to Delaware County. There were several parts of my city that were like the second ward here in Delaware. It was that population that there were disadvantages. There were an underserved area. There were a lot of elderly. There were a lot of intergenerational things happening where the grandparents were raising the grandchildren. You've seen a lot of that in very huge pockets of town. And then it started to kind of break away, and where a similar business redlining started to happen, where all of the nice stores, restaurants, things like that were moved way out to the suburban areas, and nothing, very little was left to the city of Mansfield itself as far as having any type of prosperity and growth. And so how it relates is just goes back to kind of what we were talking about, and the need to be able to come together to see each area of the city thriving, each city area of the city become more diverse. And so that is, I mean, honestly, when I did come to Delaware in 2017 to live, it looked very familiar to me.
Thank you. And there's a big portion of Mansfield that's part of our congressional district. And when I ran for delegate to the Democratic Party, they came down in full force. So yes, I'm familiar with Mansfield.
Yes.
Miss Tamika.
Yeah, so I was raised in Columbus, the West Side Hilltop area. And that area was quite diverse, full of working class families. My street was made up of Black families, Latino, Latinx families, white families. We literally had the Rainbow Coalition going on on our street. And we didn't know. It's so interesting because the families, they were in sync. It was a great street to grow up on. I really think so. We all played together, we ate together, we had families that hosted, a night where we had tamales one night, and then we had something else over here, Jamaican. So it was very diverse, very interesting. So it was a little different coming to Delaware. It was very, concentrations of people. I found that very different from how I grew up. There was a Northwest community that tended to be pristine and, mostly white. And then the second ward looked like almost like my street. It was kind of diverse. And so it was just different. But I think one of the things that I did not see here, I was very confused about, okay, where are we as it relates to the power dynamic? Because in Columbus, I was used to seeing a Black superintendent and a Black mayor and, Black teachers. And it was just so different when I got here. I'm like, where are we? Where is the power dynamic? Where's the source of? And it was interesting. It took me a while to understand the design of Delaware, and it took me a while to understand who was here. And I wanted to get to know the vanguards of the community, our elders, get those stories. It took a while to navigate Delaware, but every place has its own look and feel and brand, and Delaware is kind of what it is. So that's really all I have to offer up on that. We're here, and I think the charge is, how do we make it look like an equitable Delaware?
Thank you. Now, as moderator, I was going to go to questions, but I believe I need to ask the panel the last question, because we need to get this out. And after they give their answer, if there's time, we will ask the questions, or if we don't have time, we will get you answers to your questions. But this is something that I believe we need to make time, because I believe we only have 11 minutes left. And I made a promise to start and end today. So folks, I'm going to go to Ruchelle first. And this is the question that I'm asking of the panel. What actionable items can we identify to further these initiatives that we discussed here today?
Some identifiable items would first be, looking and identifying the history of where we've come from as a people, and I mean that for Black, Indigenous, people of color. And then there are specific literature and podcasts and media resources that are available on a large scale. I know a couple books that I wanted to share with the audience today is a new book that recently came out called Stamped by Mr. Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi. The book is not necessarily a history book, but it's an amazing book that talks about why we are where we are right now. And it kind of gives you a look of that systematic racism, the construct of how we arrived there, and then how we can move forward to come together in remedying those adversities. Another one is Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man by Emmanuel Ocho. That book addresses, again, those questions that sometimes other races have a struggle in asking and answering for themselves, but it allows an open dialogue for you to be able to understand some of the things that may plague you as to where to go, how to do it, and what that looks like as a representation of Black, Indigenous, people of color. There are a couple podcasts that are also very good that, to me, I'm all about inclusivity and trying to get everybody to stand up and be a part of the conversation and do what we need to do, because I consider silence as being violence. So what you don't say is as much as you do say. And so we need to understand that we have these resources available for you to come and ask those questions and figure out where to go. We're here to help you. As Tamika said earlier, we're not asking for you to come in and save us. We're asking for you to stand with us and how we move forward and how we identify. So there's a podcast called Race Haven by Scott Speed that allows opportunities for all races to come together and address these issues and talk about them openly. And then Let's Talk About Race with Cameron Rosen. Which is another good podcast where, again, it's about the dialogue. It's about the comfortability of having these hard conversations and being able to then move forward and say, okay, what can we do collectively to address that?
Thank you. And I'm going to borrow that phrase that you said, silence equals violence. I like
Yes.
that. So if you hear me speaking somewhere and I mention that and I act like it's mine, please charge it to my mind and not my heart, okay? Ms. Tamika?
Yeah, good stuff. So I always tend to believe that you can't heal something by hiding it. And what I mean by that is that exposing yourself to curiosity and truth and being willing to do the internal work. And I think that's a really good place for anyone to start, especially if they want to become an ally and then move to an accomplice and then eventually a co-conspirator. So one of the books that I have people start off with usually is called The Racial Healing Handbook. And it's a really good book to kind of internalize where are you at in your own self before you jump into trying to, assist and help. It's like, where are you at? Where are your biases? What are some of the unconscious and conscious things that you do? How do you move? And so this book will help you uncover exactly where you are and then help you understand your racial identity and how to use that in this movement. So I would say start there. Another book I would suggest, The Color of Law. Great book, Richard Rothstein. I've read all these books, by the way, so I'm endorsing these and co-signing these because I've read them. A great book to understand how the system is working just as it was designed to work. And it really goes through the history of segregation, the history of redlining, the history of policy making. Again, it was all designed. And so I would suggest that book too, just to get a structural and macro understanding of what racism and its impacts and effects could have. Another good book, so you want to talk about race? Another good book to put on your list. Again, it just explores some of those elementary questions. It goes through terminology that you can incorporate in your own day-to-day language as you start to, get online with the movement if you're not already online with the movement. And then I would say the other book that I have just recently finished is called Mediocre. And it talks about the legacy of white male America, how we got here. Sometimes when you think about what happened at the Capitol, the insurrection, those people felt like that what was supposed to come to them was being distributed to others and they were coming to get their stuff back. How did they get that mindset? Where did that come from? And so that book, Mediocre, explores that. And then I would say finally, podcast, White Lies by NPR, Code Switching, the 1619 Project, Oh, there's such a host. Seeing White, there's a whole host of podcasts that you can to listen for. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ibram Kendi, those are great names. If you do any type of search on any of those names, they should come up, and their podcast should come up as well. But I would just say, educate. Don't expect others to educate for you. You go out there, you self-educate, and then again, just become familiar and comfortable with language in the movement, and then again, self-reflect. Do a lot of self-reflection as you go through this work, because it's definitely going to be needed for the long haul.
Thank you. Ladies, before Pastor Curtis gets on, I'm going to ask you too, if you can put some of those books in the chat so that everyone can, because some of those books I read, but there's some that I want to read. So please put it in the chat so that people will know your books. Now, Pastor Curtis, we're going to turn to you, but we're almost at the 11th hour. So Pastor Curtis.
I read a book and attended a lecture by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, which motivated me to start educating my church on pride. And I started taking them to not only my church, but then the other churches in the area that were not Black, to educate them and let them see just what it means to be who we are. Let them see what success looks like. Let them experience a sense of pride, give them a sense of hope. And for the past year, I've been preaching nothing but hope. And now I'm getting back into it, but I think that it's hope that the change can come if we make the steps to do the things that we need to do. There's enough books out there for us to read. There's enough people out there that podcasts that we have that we need to pick up on. And then there's enough things out there that we can use to motivate ourselves and motivate the people that we are tended to trying to help to do something better for themselves. And when you start to do better, you'll get better. And I think I'll just close on that. I just think we'll get better once we learn that there is something better for us if we just take the time and get out there and do it.
Thank you very much, Pastor Curtis. Sisters and brothers, we are at the 90-minute time frame. I've been looking at the chat. There are some really good questions in the chat. And we're going to make sure somehow that you get these answers. Now, Peg, our chair, Peg, if you can come on for a second. Peg, do we have a hard stop? Because I know 90 minutes is a long time to keep people on Zoom, but do we have time to just maybe address one or two questions, or do we have a hard stop?
I believe we're able to keep going. It's just a matter of, if people want to stay. I don't believe we're limited by the Zoom technology.
Okay, well, we are down to 71 people, and then we still have people in the universe of live on Facebook, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but if our technicians could come up and just give us one or two questions for the panel, and then I'll turn it back to you, Peg, to close us out. I just want to, and Peg, is it okay that we give the panels these questions and then get answers for people?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so we'll do that through our social media, the Delaware County Democrat social media page, to try to get you the answers to the questions. But if our technicians could please come on and give us one or two questions for the panel.
This is Melanie. One question that I thought was really good was the city of Columbus has a statute that addresses ethnic intimidation and makes it a crime to harass someone or use racial slurs. Now, the question this person poses is, could the city council be asked to pass a similar ordinance? Since we have representation, people here from all over the county, I think we could probably ask that question of any community, city, township, county commissioner level here, but I'm wondering if there's something you all would want to add on that topic.
Oh man.
Who would like
I-
to answer that? And since that question is, if we can just get one answer so we can get to another. So Rochelle, I believe you were getting ready to
Yeah,
speak.
I was
if you
just
don't
going to
mind.
say, I think that is an excellent question, because I know one of the things, so last in 2020, as Second Ward Community Initiative, we held community conversations weekly and monthly from June 2020 till about October. Our last conversation we held in October was with our newly invested social action coordinator, and it took place with the police chief here to determine how hate crimes are looked at, how they're
Yep.
charged, how they're prosecuted, and to determine actually what steps can be taken on a legislative level to actually enact some of these policies, procedures, laws against any type of hate that is exploited here within the city. And he basically was explaining to us how limited as a police department they are in even being able to charge a hate crime. And basically at this point, based on what they have from the Ohio Revised Code, how they can enact if there's a verbal slur, racial slur that is given to an individual, that it would be held or treated the same level as a disorderly conduct, which in court is a minor misdemeanor, which somebody would basically end up getting, you know, almost like a summons to, or a fine, or may not even have to appear in court for that. So I think that's a very, very good point that you're hitting on. And we are continuing those conversations to figure out how we adopt such practices here.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
I would like to follow up on what Rochelle mentioned. The Second Ward did have wonderful community conversations for so many months, starting in the summer, going into the fall, and they were well attended in spite of the pandemic, and they were also broadcast live on Facebook. And I think that that experience and the response that we've had tonight from people, the interest level is definitely there, and learning more. I think that there are more people who want to engage in difficult conversations. There are people reading books and learning, and I think we just need to keep this up, interacting with each other, and just keep it rolling. And the contact information that we have for our presenters will be useful to others if they want to follow up with additional actions. We did not plan to do more than one forum on this topic. So we hope that other people will, you know, keep it rolling.
And Peg, can I just say really, really quickly, there is a great point that just jumped in the chat that I meant to mention earlier and forgot. Ms. Cardis had stated about how this discussion needs to be opened up, which is what we typically were trying to do, even with the community conversations outside of political
Right.
party. Because at this point, it doesn't matter whether it's red, blue, black, or green. At the end of the day, we all have to do the work outside of an election year, outside of a platform of Black History Month. We need to all come together on a level that brings everybody together, and actually the work being done on every level of government, regardless of your affiliation. That goes back to allyship and being able to stand flat-footed in what is right and doing what's right, no matter who it's for or against, and having the conversation no matter who is being represented. So thank you, Ms. Cardis, for bringing up that point, because I did want to highlight that earlier. Thank you, thank you.
Well, this is a hot question, so I'm going to have to give Tamika, and Pastor Curtis was about to jump out of his seat, so I'm going to give them a chance to comment on this also. Tamika?
Pastor Curtis, go ahead.
Pastor Curtis?
The bullying part, I'm in agreement. I was at that meeting as well. I was shocked at the answer that came back. I really thought that there was more that we could do. I thought that there was more that the state of Ohio had. I thought that there was something legislatively. I thought legally that there was something more that we can stand on. But I think that's up to the people now. And sometimes we don't give ourselves the credit that we so justly deserve. We should take on the credit of standing up and presenting your case and making sure that there's some things that have been skipped over. I mean, we've been concentrating on the COVID and everything, but there's a lot of things, small things that are occurring right now. Because I've been asked, I gotta go to the high school to have a conversation about some things that was said to individuals. And right now, I don't know how I'm going to approach it. I don't know what I'm going to say, since it's up to the school, since it's up to parents. I don't know what to do. Or say, but I'm just gonna give them a moral issue, and then I'm just gonna step away and hope that that works. But we need to do better about the laws, because I just thought that civil rights laws, that was a civil rights issue, and it isn't. I don't know. Really, that's killing me.
Thank you. Tamika, did you want to comment, or do you want us to go to the next question? Okay. Do we have another question, Melody?
One question referenced the conversation earlier on redlining and housing. The visitor said, when I bought my house 27 years ago, I was told flat out by a realtor that Delaware was redlined. No people of color north of Central. We have had a burst of growth in the housing development and building of apartments away from the city center. Is this an issue in the newer housing? Can we target the realtors and apartment managers for education?
Who would like to take that question?
So redlining is definitely not a new thing. It's been around, and it's been intentional to concentrate certain people in one areas and to redirect people to go to other areas, right? So I think we can hold everyone accountable. I think it's not a matter of, if it's possible. It's, we notice, we know by looking at the design of Delaware that it is happening. It's no secret that it's happening. And so whether it's the Board of Realtors, or whether it's fair housing, or whether it's, getting people to understand, we can hold whoever we need to hold accountable for it. Banks that provide loans. There's a Community Reinvestment Act that prohibits certain forms of what's happening. So I think the issue of who can we hold accountable, yes, we can hold people accountable, but again, it's up to us to uplift this issue, to say that it's happening, we know it's happening, and we want to stop it. But I guess the question is, as a community, is this an issue that we are willing to take up? And is this an issue that we see as our own, or is it an other issue? And I think that's the thing that we've got to ask ourselves and be honest about. But yeah, I believe in accountability. And I think that we have the capacity to do it, but it's going to take the collective.
Thank you very much, Tamika. Sisters and brothers, that's our time. I appreciate everyone. I appreciate you allowing me to be your moderator. I love this conversation. I believe we picked the best people for this conversation. They were full of such great knowledge, and I'm just honored to be among this lovely, intelligent panel. And I learned a lot from you guys, and I just wanted to say thank you. They say that the two greatest words in the English language is thank you, and I just want to say thank you for what you gave us. Thank you for what you're doing in Delaware County, and thank you for what you will do in Delaware County. And we appreciate each and every one of you. God bless you. And at this time, sisters and brothers, I'm going to turn it over to our party chair for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andre, and all of our presenters. You were absolutely wonderful. I knew you by reputation, but you did not disappoint. I'm sorry, this was an event that we didn't anticipate would be this well attended or well received, and I'm really grateful that it was. Thank you to Andre Washington, Ruchelle Pride, Tamika, Vinson Reid, Reverend Michael Curtis, and also to our technical people. We've had Caleb Lohr helping with our Zoom, as well as Melanie Farkas and Holly Hansen on our Facebook page. So if anyone here is not already receiving emails from the Delaware County Democratic Party, I'd like to invite you to sign up for our newsletter, because you can get newsletters from us if you go to ohiodelladems.org. So sign up to get our newsletter, and you will learn more about whatever we have to share. Thank you all so much.
Bless you. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody. God bless. Take care.
All right. Good.